Hey guys, it's Amit. So today I wanted to talk about Bitcoin. So wow, what a week it was for Bitcoin last week. Bitcoin dropped over 11% over just a couple of day period. There was a significant amount of volatility on Bitcoin. I think there were primarily two reasons that drove this level of volatility. One was the comments that were made by Janet Yellen, who's a presumed Treasury Secretary under the Biden administration, at least at the recording of this video, basically came out and said that Bitcoin was effectively being used for illicit financing activities. So what she said, let me read this thing out so I don't get it wrong, but the Treasury Secretary has suggested to lawmakers to curtail the use of Bitcoin amid terrorism concerns. She went on to say that cryptocurrency transactions were used mainly for illicit financing activities. When she said that, that was the first reason that drove some of the volatility and price reduction as it relates to Bitcoin. Then the second thing that happened was Bitmex research basically came out and said something to the effect that Bitcoin had a double spend problem. So double spend is this kind of like fact pattern, right? Where you're able to spend your Bitcoin more than once, which is a fundamental flaw I've actually proven out when it comes to Bitcoin as well as other cryptocurrencies. Now, I don't want to spend any time talking about that Bitmex stuff because for all intents and purposes, it proved to be unfounded. But I think we need to spend a bit of time just talking about Janet Yellen and the comments that she basically had. I think it is safe for us to assume that Janet Yellen is going to be confirmed as a Treasury Secretary in just a matter of a couple of weeks. And what her comments is basically reflective of is this notion that there is going to be a significant amount of regulation as it relates to Bitcoin, and that the Joe Biden administration is going to be tough on Bitcoin as well as other cryptocurrencies. Now, a lot of people that are in this Bitcoin basically welcome some of this level of regulation. You want it because when you have that level of regulation, it creates further legitimacy as it relates to cryptocurrencies such as Bitcoin. And when you have greater legitimacy, you have greater adoption, you have greater usage, and all of that helps the price action as it relates to something like Bitcoin. Here by certain comments such as those made by Janet Yellen, Treasury Secretary, I think it is important for us to evaluate what is our investment thesis as it relates to Bitcoin. Now, if you're in it as an inflation hedge, right, because the Fed continues to print out all this money and there's this whole $2 trillion bill that'll most likely go through as well. So they're going to continue to print out this money and you need an inflation hedge. And if you're in this notion that, hey, Bitcoin is going to be that inflation hedge and that is why you're in it, that could be a reason why. You could be in the Bitcoin game because you think it's a storer of value, right? And if you think that that is the case, you can absolutely be in Bitcoin as well, because all of those are legitimate reasons why somebody may be in the game. Now, if those are the reasons why you're in the game, then you have something like Janet Yellen's commentary, and that basically is not very meaningful to you, right? You may actually view this price reduction in Bitcoin to essentially be a tremendous buying opportunity, right? You look at it, oh, it's dropping to 31, 29,000, so on. It could be a good way to basically drop your dollar cost average as it relates to something like Bitcoin and basically realize some of the upside, because none of this has to do with illicit financing activities, right? So if those are your presumed notion in terms of why that is the case, regulation is not necessarily a bad thing when it comes to something such as this. Now, if you have been following this channel, you know that I'm somewhat skeptical and cynical as it relates to Bitcoin as well as other cryptocurrencies for that matter. I mean, I think that the price action as it relates to Bitcoin is primarily just being driven by supply and demand. At a certain point in time, that does have a reversal effect associated with it. And there's lots of experts who have come out and basically said their opinions and their views as it relates to something such as Bitcoin. I did a video on this a few weeks back where I kind of like listed out a host of reasons why I'm cynical and skeptical as it relates to something such as Bitcoin. And I'll include a link for that towards the tail end of this video, as well as included in the description below. But what I thought was interesting, right? What I thought was interesting when it came to what happened last week as it relates to Bitcoin was the extent of the volatility. It was actually very surprising to me because when that news came out, both of those pieces of news actually came out, I expected a significant decline on Bitcoin. Not just this 11% number, not just this, 29,000, I think is where it basically hit, right? I was expecting it to drop much, much, much more than that. I mean, the level of volatility in Bitcoin and other cryptos, I mean, that's kind of like fundamentally the name of the game. It is known for volatility. I mean, on every given day, Bitcoin can move up, thousands, several $1,000s, or it can move down several $1,000s. So it's like, if you're scared of volatility, you should not be in the Bitcoin game. But it only dropped to, from like 34, 35,000 to like this 29,000 number, which seems like a lot, but in the grand scheme of things, when it comes to something such as Bitcoin, it's not that big a deal. And from a technicals perspective, what it got me thinking about is, hey, maybe this is a floor, right? When you have something like 29, 30, 31,000, it perhaps is a floor, because it doesn't seem like no matter what you do, it's dropping this valuation of Bitcoin significantly below that. Now, if that is your kind of like fundamental presumption, if you believe that this 29, 30, 31,000 could effectively be a floor, and if you're willing to take into account some of the price action and the volatility associated with Bitcoin, it may be an opportunity to get into Bitcoin when this happens again. So personally, at least from my perspective, I went out and I bought some amount of Bitcoin because I was curious to try out this thesis as it relates to this kind of like technical floor, if you will. And further, I was just like, hey, this is creating some level of diversification in my portfolio. Now, Bitcoin comprises less than 1% of my portfolio. Heck, it might even be comprising less than 0.5% of my portfolio. So I'm not even that worried about essentially losing it all. And I think if most people go into this particular class of investment in that manner, it won't necessarily be a bad thing. It's just more diversification, and you get to partake in the upside if there is upside associated with it. And if it goes down to absolutely nothing, maybe you can buy some more, maybe you get some more dollar cost averaging out of it, and if it goes back up, that is beneficial. And if it doesn't, so you lose it all, it's not that big a deal, and you move on with your life. But I thought it was just interesting, at least from a technicals perspective, that some of these adverse comments that are coming out from the Treasury Secretary and this whole double spend notion, and all you have is this Bitcoin price basically only dropping by the amount that it did. So what are your thoughts as it relates to Bitcoin? What are your thoughts as it relates to the price action? What are your thoughts as it relates to Janet Yellen and her commentary and the extent of regulation that may come out of it and the price action associated with all of it? I mean, there's so many things to unpack here. It's absolutely crazy. But include all of that in the comments below. I think it will definitely be some very interesting and valued reading. So if you found value to this type of video in terms of evaluating your investment thesis as it relates to something such as Bitcoin, and also the notion of how regulation is perhaps a good thing, and also this kind of like technical floor where it seems like Bitcoin may be a good buying opportunity, definitely subscribe to the channel, ring the notification bell, hit the like button. I'm not in this position where I want to just do videos on Bitcoin on like all the time, right? I don't want to be a Bitcoin channel or a cryptocurrency channel. I think that's just absolutely insane. But when it is something meaningful, I absolutely will provide some content and some perspective as it relates to Bitcoin and other cryptocurrencies for consideration purposes. So definitely subscribe to the channel so that you're notified when I release all of those videos, and I will see you soon.